Shalom and welcome to a small series of 3 video lessons on the Hebrew of Psalm 23. Psalm 23 in Hebrew, this well-known, famous, long beloved psalm that we find in the Hebrew Bible. As far as possible, I'm making these lessons suitable for those who have little or no Hebrew, as well as those who do know Hebrew. Of course, the benefit will be greater if you do know, and I have prepared 44 numbered Hebrew lessons that can lead you up to this point. And there are other books and lessons online that can help as well. But the advantage of mine is that I avoid technical and grammatical terms as much as possible, and I've trimmed away all unnecessary extras that you have to learn. I only introduce them when we make use of them. So instead, for example, of memorizing and reciting the alphabet, we learn the letters as they come up in actual scriptural extracts. So you only learn things when useful and necessary. And every example we use is from scripture. None are made up. This means we get into great scripture right from lesson 1. But if you don't have time at this stage to go through a course like that, I have made this little group of lessons on Psalm 23 self-contained, and I've explained everything, although the explanations will of necessarily be a bit brief. So, why read Psalm 23 in Hebrew? Because any translation is like a reproduction that's faithful to only so many pixels. Here we have a nice painting, and we can admire it, but it pays to admire it from a bit of a distance, because if we put the magnifying glass to it, we see there are little imperfections where the brush strokes come. But if it's the original masterpiece, then you can look at it as closely as you like. And so that's the advantage of reading in Hebrew. Okay, to begin, have you ever wondered why the King James Bible says, "He maketh me to lie down in green pastures"? And so the NIV 1984, "He makes me lie down in green pastures." Whereas some modern versions, such as the NLT, say, "He lets me rest in green pastures, green meadows." Or have you wondered why the King James Version says, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death"? Other modern versions, like the NLT, say, "Even when I walk through the darkest valley." Well, those are a couple of questions, and we'll be looking at the answers to those and several other interesting points as we begin to tackle the first couple of verses in Psalm 23 in their original Hebrew as written by David 3,000 years ago. Here we have it, the first 2 verses of Psalm 23 in Hebrew. Mizmor LeDavid, Yahweh Ro'i Lo Echesar, Bin Oth Deshe Yarbitzeni, Almei Menuchot Yenaheleni. So Mizmor is the usual Hebrew word for psalm. It's translated psalmos in the Septuagint and psalmos in Latin. In German, you still pronounce both the P and the S. English speakers have found them both too hard to say. In ancient Greek, the word at first referred to the sound of plucking or twanging a stringed instrument, the ps sound, but then it came to mean a song sung accompanied by a stringed instrument. And so the Septuagint translators used it to translate mizmor, psalm. So this word psalm comes directly from that Greek word. But the Hebrew word itself comes from a verb zamor, which means to play an instrument or sing praises to God. This word, the verb, is used commonly in the Psalms too. For example, Psalm 27:6, "I will sing and make music to God." So this M at the beginning is a common thing used in Hebrew to make a noun out of the verb. So the verb is zamor, and the M in the front of it makes it into a noun, a psalm. Okay, next we come to le, and le is of, or it could mean to or for or of, and in this case it's generally agreed that it means belonging to, in the sense of by, authorship. So David is the author. And the name, here's the name David in Hebrew, Dawid. In ancient Hebrew it's pronounced Dawid. The emphasis goes on the last syllable, Dawid, and this letter here in ancient Hebrew is pronounced W. In modern Hebrew it's pronounced D. V, I mean David. So that's how this word came to be written with a V in English, David. In other European languages it's still pronounced a little bit more like the original pronunciation, Dawid, at least David you find in other European languages. So there we are, the name, very famous name, it's become a very popular name all around the world, David. So Psalm of David. And here we have God's sacred name, Yahweh, and I've just written it with the 4 capital letters. I talked about this in Hebrew lesson 2 when we came across it in Psalm 148 verse 1. I explained why we use the vowels Y-A-H-W-E-H, and the pious reluctance of Jews in later times to say the name at all, and this got stronger after the last Old Testament prophet wrote. So Jews to this day will not say this name, but they will substitute maybe Lord, or sometimes thy name, Hashem, they say. So there it is, the sacred name of God, first revealed to Moses. And the next word is my shepherd. So this bit here indicates my, and these letters here indicate shepherd. And in fact it's a participle, and so it says my shepherding person. The idea of God shepherding his people occurs in several places in the Bible. For example, Genesis 48:15, Psalm 28:9 and 80 verse 1. But Psalm 23 is unique in its personal, individual application. My shepherd. A book that came out recently claimed that Augustine's Confessions was the first text in which the first person singular voice, the I, comes into play in spiritual and intellectual discourse, but a count in the Hebrew text of Psalm 23 shows that the first person pronoun in various forms is found 17 times in this psalm. And this brief psalm was written more than a millennium before the famous church father Augustine. Interesting stuff. Next point to notice here is that there is no is. The Hebrew just says Yahweh, my shepherd, or my shepherding person. And so for English we have to supply is. It appears in the King James Version in italics, which the King James translators used to indicate a word that they added that wasn't in the text and they added. But in their time, italics didn't give emphasis like they do today. So it's fine for a translator just to say the Lord is my shepherd. We don't need to worry about introducing that word. It's required in English, but not required in Hebrew, so commonly omitted. So, just a point about these sounds. This sound was originally a a really guttural sound said with strong tension down low in the throat. In modern Israel, a lot of people don't pronounce it quite like that, as you still find the same letter pronounced in Arabic languages today. But some Israelis do. So if we try and say it in that way, we would say it rori. So I can't do it very well. You try and put tension right down in your throat as you say it. Now this letter here is a related one. Again, it occurs deep down in the throat, but this one is just simply a cutting off of the air. So we would say lo. You say the sound and then you cut off the air at the end of it, lo. Just suddenly cut off the air right at the bottom of your throat. And so that's probably the way that David would have pronounced it, but in modern Hebrew they don't worry too much about that, they just say lo. But if you want to say it more like probably David would have said it, you could say lo, and you cut it off suddenly at the bottom of your throat. And that means not. Now here's another verb. The here means I, and chasar means lack. This is what's called an imperfect verb. Now ancient Hebrew did not have tenses. They do in modern Hebrew have tenses, but ancient Hebrew had what's grammatically called aspects. So the imperfect just meant imperfect, meaning incomplete. So that could roughly correspond to present or future in a tense, in a language that has a tense system, and whereas the perfect is anything that's completed, so that would usually correspond to past. So this is imperfect in the ancient Hebrew sense. So it could mean I do not lack or I will not lack. So that will explain that strange, to an English speaker it's strange that you find some English translations say things like I do not lack present tense, and others saying I will not lack future tense. It seems a strange thing that you could get that sort of variation. But this is the explanation, that it's the imperfect aspect in Hebrew. It's not actually a tense. I said a little bit more about this in Hebrew lesson 12. So the old King James Version said, I shall not want. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Want in its old sense of lacking something, not in its modern sense of I don't want him. The NET version says, I lack nothing. And the Good News Bible, Good News Translation, says, I have everything I need. It's interesting that the Good News there has changed it to a positive statement, which they think is perhaps a more natural way to say it in English. On the other hand, they've lost a bit of the punchy brevity of the older versions and the Hebrew. Okay, and the rest of the psalm details how David is bountifully supplied with everything he needs. So here we come to verse 2. Bin oth deshe yarbitzeni alme menuchoth yenachaleni. Notice the rhyming ends here. Yarbitzeni yenachaleni. So that's a deliberate rhyme, a sort of thing that's lost in translation, but it makes it a little more poetic and perhaps a little easier to memorize. Because remember, in ancient times, scrolls were very valuable, and scrolls were also very difficult to manipulate, and so most people would have just learnt this by heart. They wouldn't open their Bibles and read it every morning like we can in their own bedrooms or their own living rooms, but they would memorize it, and so they would have it stored away in their memory. Okay, so the B means in, and North means pastures. So notice there I am pronouncing this This letter, by the way, the name is Aleph. It's the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, and in this word I am saying it with a little catch in my throat. Bin oth desha, pastures of grass. I put this little of in square brackets because there is no word in Hebrew corresponding to it, but the two words here are joined in what in Hebrew they call the construct form, and that corresponds to English of pastures of grass, or in fact we might say grassy pastures. Yarbitseni, and that ni on the end, it's attached in Hebrew, it means me, and this here means he. So again, this is an imperfect, so we've translated it as the present, makes me lie down. So, but we could translate he makes me or he lets me. You could also say he lets me lie down. And again, it might seem strange that one form can have both meanings. Strange to English speakers anyway, because we make a clear distinction and we see a big difference between them. But the fact is that this same form of the verb in Hebrew can mean lets me lie down, or it can mean makes me lie down. We see another example in Psalm 119 verse 10, where another form of the verb like this is called a hifil. Could be translated, do not cause me to stray from your commandments, or do not allow me to stray from your commandments. And here the second is clearly the meaning. It's not so clear which is intended here in Psalm 23 verse 2, and quite a few modern versions, including NIV, support the King James version's makes me. But the Good News Bible, the NLT and the CEV have lets me, which I think is actually the translation to be preferred in plain modern English. Al me and al, the first approximation meaning of al is upon, but it does have a range of meaning, and here to is usually translated to. This is going with the second part of this verse. It's linked with this part. So two waters, again another construct of rest. And he, this is he, leads me. Again we have an M here making a noun, same as we had here. And what else do we say about this? Yes, two waters of rest, he leads me. The interesting point to me about this is that in modern Western countries we set dogs onto the sheep, but in the ancient world of the Israelites, the shepherd would lead his flock. He leads me to, so that's another reason why we need a bit of re-education to understand the Bible properly. Not only do we have a different language, but we have a whole different cultural setting. So there are the first two verses of this wonderful and well-loved psalm, and the rest of the psalm will go into detail how David is bountifully supplied with everything he needs. I promise, available to you and me too. Let's take it up.